The process of buying and selling a business can be frightening for the parties involved. What paperwork is needed? What is the true market value of the business? How do you know what transactions are required to be processed in addition to the sale of the business? Welcome to Biz Broker Talk, where you'll find the answers to these questions and much more. Your hosts, Robert Howells and Doug Scheiding, have a decade of experience providing business broker services to large and small businesses. Today, they're ready to help you. Here's Robert and Doug.
Welcome to Biz Broker Talk with Robert Howells
and Doug Scheiding.
Today we're visiting with John Dini. He's an exit planner, coach, facilitator, and consultant. He's written several books. One is 11 Things You Absolutely Need to Know About Selling Your Business. Also a book I finished a couple weeks ago, Hunting in a Farmer's World, about the differences that drive entrepreneurs. And lastly, Beating the Boomer Bust. That's what we're going to visit with John about today. In the first segment, we're going to talk about the boomers, why they're unique. They were the first technology generation. You want to maybe define the baby boomer?
Yeah, the baby boomers, well, the generation was born between 1945 and 1964. In 1945, the GIs came back from World War II and immediately started forming families. By 1946, the birth rate in the United States had exceeded 4 million for the first time, and it stayed above 4 million until the middle 1960s. So a phenomenal glut. By 1965, baby boomers were 2 out of every 5 people in the United States. They were 40% of the population was under 21. Today, we would consider that to be an emerging nation kind of statistic in Africa or Asia. But actually, back in 1965, that's what the USA looked like, was totally focused on kids, a swarm with children. And so not only were they highly influential just because of their numbers, because they were the largest generation in history up until that time, but they're the first technology generation. Now, their parents had radio, and radio was an entertainment medium, but we all know that pictures are worth 1,000 words. So, and if you wanted pictures of the news, where did you go?
Movie theater for the reel,
for the
newsreels.
Right, and you got to see them once, no instant replay, no 7 different angles. They went up and they said, here's 5 minutes of news, and this is what happened 2 weeks ago somewhere else in the world, and then you watched a movie, by which time, at the end of which I'm sure you forgot everything you saw in the news.
Right.
So the boomers had television. Television was invented before World War II, but it really didn't start coming into the homes until 1946 or 47, just as the boomers were being born. By 1951, we had color TV. Yeah. And it started getting into residences very, very quickly and became a huge force, which it still is today. It's completely changed the home and family life.
That's when mass marketing was invented. The mass marketing and TV shows and foods and restaurants were designed for that.
Right. And boomers, for the first time, were marketed to as a generation. Before that, people marketed regionally. So if you wanted to sell something for Southern children, you advertised and marketed to Southern parents, and to Yankee children to Yankee parents, to West Coast children to West Coast parents. And they had different food preferences. They had different magazine preferences. They all had their regional and ethnic differences. I mean, I was a Yankee. I was raised in New Jersey, and I don't think I tasted okra till I was about 30 years old. I had no idea what that was, and I think I've only tasted it once in my life. But
yeah, you didn't miss much, is what you're saying.
No. But really, we had, the boomers were the first ones at Madison Avenue figured out that we could sell to children. And the first genius in this marketing effort was Walt Disney. Walt Disney figured with Mickey Mouse Club and other products that he could go directly to the kids. He did not have to sell through the parents. So you had content developed for children, and you had advertising developed for children. And the impact of it was phenomenal. You think back to the Mickey Mouse Club, Annette and Bobby and the whole crowd. In the 1960s, in the late 1950s to early 1960s, when the Mickey Mouse Club, the first Mickey Mouse Club, was at its prime. This is before the days of Christina Aguilera,
Britney Spears, and all that.
Spears.
Yeah.
They weren't Musketeers back then. But Disney sold Mouseketeer ears for kids. Now, if you wanted to buy Mouseketeer ears in the late 50s, what did you have to do? You had to mail them money. That's the only thing you could do. You took a check or a money order, or in those days, postage stamps were legal currency, and you put it in an envelope and you sent it to Anaheim, California. There were no 800 numbers.
No.
There were no credit cards. There was certainly no internet. And even with those obstacles, Disney was shipping 25,000 pair of Mouseketeer ears a day for a decade.
Wow.
So, the boomers were this homogenous generation that experienced everything all at the same time. Certainly, the Kennedy assassination is the iconic moment for many boomers, 1963.
Yeah.
And every one of them saw the Zapruder film. Every one of them saw, the Jack Ruby shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald, because they were all present. It all happened in their living room.
Right.
And so the boomers became this collective generation that were kind of raised the same across the entire country. And so when they bought something, they all bought it. When they got into a new fad, they all got into a new fad. You think of the things like hula hoops that, millions and millions and millions sold because the boomers wanted it. And then they started changing television. If you look at the middle 1960s and the influence of boomers on television, boomers got what they wanted. When they wanted television content to change, it changed. We saw Bill Cosby as the first African American to star in a major show with I Spy, Robert Coleman I Spy. We saw Flip Wilson become the first black man to have his own television show. We saw the Smothers Brothers and Archie Bunker and All in the Family bring politics into mainstream comedy and mainstream variety shows. That was unheard of. Milton Berle didn't talk about politics in his variety show. Red Skelton didn't talk about politics in his variety show. Those things changed because the boomers were interested in it. So the boomers became accustomed to having all this influence and really having kind of the entire country cater to what they wanted because they were the most powerful buying group of all time.
Right. Changed the complete shift in the demographics or education all the way down.
Yeah. Education is an interesting thing. The generation before the boomers, the World War II generation, even with the GI Bill, was 6% college degreed. The boomers were 25% college degreed. And that happened very, very quickly. If you look in 1966, the first boomers started turning 21. From 1966 to 1975, there was a 150% increase in the annual number of college graduates put out into American society.
That's amazing.
And this kind of curve is a one-time curve. That number is now about 27% or 28%, so it's grown with the population, but it hasn't grown percentage-wise. The boomers were a one-time shift and an extremely rapid shift. Everything happened fast. In 10 years to completely change the educational makeup of the workforce in the United States. You look at other things that were happening quickly, certainly not because of the boomers, but the boomers got used to instant gratification. The Beatles, besides the pop phenomenon they were, from the time the Beatles first appeared on Ed Sullivan until the time Jimi Hendrix stood up at Woodstock and played Voodoo Child for 500,000 hippies, it was 5 years. From the time of the first Gemini capsule orbited the Earth until men walked on the moon was 4.5 years. I mean, these things happen so fast. And the boomers became accustomed to this instant, if we think of it, we can do it. So the impact on the boomers was they were used to being the center of attention.
Getting instant gratification.
Instant gratification. Everybody tailoring everything for them. But when they got to the workplace, they had a surprise coming. Because corporate America didn't have quadruple the number of executive jobs that it had 10 years before. They had all these college graduates pouring into their application lines. They didn't have corner offices for everybody.
And you always said that the idea of paying your dues, having to be there for so many years before you could move up the ladder peg, and here everybody came in at once with better quality education.
Well, and the boomers were not interested in 30 years in a gold watch. That's not where they were going. They all wanted the corner office.
Right.
But there's only 4 corner offices in a building, and there were 40 boomers going for it.
Right.
So they became the most competitive generation in history because everything was scarce for boomers. It wasn't that they were starving. I mean, food wasn't scarce. As a matter of fact, that flood of consumers into the American economy lifted our GDP growth rate for the next 40 years. And again, you see the boomers move through, the 80s, greed is good, conspicuous consumption. The boomer parents who were living on a shoestring after World War II would show you a cocktail table in their living room and say, yeah, this cocktail table, it looks just like a $200 cocktail table, but we only paid $60 for it. The boomers brought people in and said, yeah, that may look like a $60 cocktail table, but we paid $500 for it.
It's hard work.
That was their badge of honor, being able to consume conspicuously. So the boomers couldn't find a place in corporate America. Those jobs weren't open. So they became business owners. They became business owners in numbers never seen before in history and never seen again. When the boomers turned 30, now we're up to about 1974, 75, and the boomers started turning 30. By the time the first boomers were turning 40, the rate of new business ownership in the United States had increased by 250% on an annual basis. We had gone from about 250,000 new small businesses opening a year to 600,000 new small businesses opening a year. And that was all boomers. They were plunging into business left and right because they needed to make that corner office salary without the corner office.
Right.
And that 600,000 number, which topped out in 1986, 1987, is flat today. In 2014, we will open 600,000 new businesses. Even though the country has grown from 170 million to 320 million, we still open the same number of small businesses. So, when I do this in front of groups, I do a lot of this in front of professional and trade associations. I have all the charts, which, don't work nearly as well on radio. I've got one here. You can see, Bob, what I'm saying, but unfortunately the audience can't.
Well, we have the faces for radio too, so that's why we're here.
But the fact that it's a one-time surge leaves us with the situation we have today, which is baby boomers currently between 49 and 69 years old account for just over 20% of the American population, but they own 2/3 of all the businesses.
Yeah, we see that as a brokerage.
Sure, you guys are seeing boomers every day, and as you know well, the International Business Broker Association does a survey with Pepperdine University every quarter
We read that.
on the sale of small businesses, and in the fourth quarter of 2012, for the first time in history, the number one reason for selling small businesses was boomers looking to exit. And that has remained the number one reason and will remain the number one reason for the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, we knew that in 2002 was really the year to get in business brokers. That's where the tip of it really came in. And 2004 is when we fully got into business brokers. That's what we saw.
Mm-hmm.
That's the market for the next 15 years, 20 years, what we thought at that time.
And what has happened so far is nothing compared to what's about to happen. It's about to get really crazy. We have a generation following the boomers, which generally is called Gen X.
Gen X.
And Gen X is a little more than half the size of the boomers. And we can talk in the next segment, we can get into the differences in the generation. But, the first thing you have to look at when you look at business exit is just the numbers. By 2018, if you overlay the trough, now in 1964, the birth rate started falling dramatically, and they didn't recover until 1987 or 88. Now, there's two reasons for that, one of which the boomers who created the two-income family or popularized the two-income family in their quest for material consumption delayed having children. The other thing that conveniently occurred in 1964 was Congress passed a law enabling birth control. So that slowed down the birth rate instantaneously for some reason. I guess people were waiting for that.
Yeah.
But so if you overlay those two charts, the peak of the boomers corresponds with the trough in Gen X, and by 2018 we will have 4,000 boomers retiring every single day for the next 5 years with no one to replace them. There'll be 8,000 retiring, but there's only 4,000 Gen Xers to replace them.
That's an amazing statistic, John. We've been speaking with John Dini, discussing the baby boomer bust, and we will return and talk about the competitive boomers go into business.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
Business brokerage is a very regional business due to the requirement of having face-to-face buyer and seller meetings. While Robert and Doug are regionally centric to South Central Texas with their brokerage company, Business Brokers of San Antonio, and their equipment appraisal company, Equipment Appraisers of San Antonio, they have also established BizBrokerTalk.com to help assist sellers and buyers with finding professionals in a variety of areas required in the business transaction process. This includes certified business brokers, SBA loan packagers, 401k conversion companies, lenders, as well as other necessary advisory sources. Whether you're selling or buying a business, you need a team of professionals on your side to guide you through the process. Visit BizBrokerTalk.com today. And if you're in the South Texas area, please visit Business Brokers of San Antonio at bbofsa.com or Equipment Appraisers of San Antonio at eaofsa.com. Do you, like most Americans, spend the majority of your life at work? Are you making it the joy that it deserves to be? Or are you feeling drained and unfocused? Tune in to A Great Place to Work with hosts Kurt Kaufman and Dr. Kathy Sorensen. Your hosts have more than 30 years of experience in workplace consulting and are ready to bring you the secrets and success stories of businesses who are making their business a great place to work. Listen every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Business Channel and enjoy a better workplace and a better life.
The business community's first choice in Internet Talk Radio. Voice America Business Network.
This is BizBroker Talk with Robert Howells and Doug Scheiding. To reach the show today, please call 1-866-472-5790. That's 1-866-472-5790. Or you may send an email to podcast@bizbrokertalk.com. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to BizBroker Talk with Robert Howells and
Doug Scheiding.
We're speaking today with John Dini. He's a motivational speaker, a business expert, and an author, and we're talking today about his book and presentation. Does seminars on the baby boomer bust, and we're going to talk about the competitive boomers go into business. I think I'll kind of start off with a anecdotal story I have. I grew up in Houston. I got to meet Harry Levy and George Zimmerman started the Men's Warehouse, and it was they had to eat. They started selling raincoats in Houston. That was the beginning of the Men's Warehouse. A couple of hippies, that's in their words, a couple of hippies went out and started selling raincoats, and that's the business turned into. I mean, I think you've probably saw hundreds of stories like that in your research.
Yeah, and there's hundreds of thousands of stories more. We had a great economy. Putting 80 million young consumers in an economy does amazing things for it. A rising tide lifts all boats. One of the things that I do in my presentation is I ask the audience, can anybody name the 4 countries in Europe, in the European Union, with the lowest birth rate for the last 30 years, about 30 years? And the answer is Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, which are the 4 disaster economies.
Yeah.
They're disaster economies partially because their governments didn't spend wisely, but they're disaster economies because they don't have young workers and they don't have young consumers growing their market. Their market is actually shrinking. Fewer people are buying fewer goods, and that's not good for an economy. As a matter of fact, back in, I think it was August 2011, the time's flying, but you remember when we got downgraded from AAA to AA plus? And David T. Beers is the head of sovereign debt rating for Standard & Poor's, and he was on Morning Joe the next morning, Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski's show. And they were kind of, as talking heads on shows do, they were kind of busting them. They're saying, well, we're America. When do we get back to AAA? And he was kind of dodging the question. And they said, well, come on, there's got to be something we can do. Is it the debt? Is it the deficit? Is it, And finally, in frustration, he said, you have to understand that this country's demographic peak was 10 years ago. In other words, we're not getting back to AAA because we don't have that huge ratio of productive workers to total population that we had when the boomers were all in their prime.
Oh, it's true.
So this is inescapable. I tell people this is gravity. These numbers occurred 65 years ago. There's nothing you can do about them. So the boomers go into business, and they go into business in record numbers. But they have a problem when they go into business because the boomers may be ambitious and they may be workaholics and they may identify, and they do identify by what they do for a living, much more attached to that than the later generations, and they identify with what they own. My $60 cocktail table that I paid $500 for. And because of that competitiveness, they wanted to go into business, but they didn't have a special business gene. There's not some clever entrepreneurial synapse in a boomer brain that makes them better business people than anybody else. So they were no more qualified to go out and open up companies, brand new companies, than anybody else. Fortunately, where there's a market, there's somebody that's willing to sell to the market. And we had a couple people. Harlan Sanders was one. Howard Johnson was another. And Frank Wright and Roy Allen of A&W Root Beer were those three companies were the pioneers that started business model franchising. And what that was, it was a change from previous franchising where people just sold geographic territories. In business model franchising, they went to the boomers and they said, look, all you have to be willing to do is put up some money and work your tails off. And boomers are good at working their tails off. They're good at the 60-hour work week.
Sure.
And if you'll come in and work day and night in one of these businesses, we'll show you how to make the same money you would have made if you had gotten the corner office. And not only was there a market for people who wanted to do this and were willing to work very, very hard, to be successful. But the boomers were the perfect market for franchises.
And this is in the late 60s, mid-60s?
This is actually early, 1943 is when they started.
Right, but the franchising aspect of the growth of franchising
was phenomenal. And what happened was in 1950, there were about 200 franchises sold in the United States. In 1960, there were about 700. In 1970, there were about 2,000. In 1975, there were 5,000. By 1980, there were 25,000 a year being sold in the United States. I mean, just an explosion. Over 1,000% increase on an annual basis.
That's everything. That's McDonald's.
That's all franchises together.
Hotels.
Obviously, most were retail. Boomers were raising kids in their cars. Boomers were creating the soccer mom family, where you ran kids from karate practice to tutoring to Little League. And they needed to stop that. As a matter of fact, one of the guys who figured out that trend and jumped onto the boomer bandwagon was Lee Iacocca with the minivan. Do you guys remember what the great feature of the first minivans were? And it wasn't the sliding doors.
Was it the big drink holder? Or?
The cup holders.
Yeah.
Oh,
everybody was totally excited about cup holders because everybody had cars full of kids that they were bringing, that they were feeding at drive-through windows at franchises, while they ran them from t-ball to soccer practice.
Right.
And if you look at the curve of minivans, it's phenomenal. Minivans went straight up from when they were invented in 1984, and the boomers were starting to have kids. They crested in about 1998, 2000, and then the boomers suddenly reached a new plateau where they had enough money to buy SUVs, and minivan sales fell by 80% in the next 3 years. Because when the boomers leave a market, the market's dead. That's it. You're not doing that anymore. So here we have these franchises churning out and these boomers working like crazy. And a lot of franchisees are still selling to middle and late age boomers, downsized executives, people looking for a second career. And they're, I see franchises now that cost $300,000-$400,000, and they're almost like the old grocery store on the New York streets. Mom's expected to open up the store in the morning and dad's going to close it at night so that they can make $100,000 a year. And boomers will do that. The generations behind them will not. And this has become a monstrous issue for business sellers. We talked while we were off the air, and you mentioned that you're seeing a lot of younger boomers coming in, people in their late 40s, early 50s.
Buying businesses.
Looking for second careers as buyers, buying businesses. But those people, again, will go away in the next 5 or 6 years. You're not going to have 60-somethings coming in looking to buy businesses. And the generation that follows does not have the same set of values.
And that's what we're talking about in the third section.
Right.
That's the second of the show.
And the boomers raised them, so it's, whose fault is that?
Yeah, they don't have the same work ethic of their family.
It's a different work ethic.
Yeah.
They were, the boomers were raised to believe that anybody could be president.
Right.
I heard that all the time. You could grow up to be president. I know this isn't a political show, but now we've seen that's true.
Right.
One of the interesting facts that I remember you stating was in one of your presentations is that the baby boomers inherited the greatest wealth that had been accumulated by man in history of mankind.
Well, they're inheriting, but they're passing on.
But they also created the most wealth of any generation.
Yes.
So it's a double whammy. You've got this inheritance of wealth from the great generation to the baby boomers that's happened, 70s, 80s.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the greatest accumulation of wealth, and then we have this tide has fallen, and there's not that people to come in to replicate that.
Right. The Gen Xers will do fine because they are going to enter. Those who are interested in entrepreneurship are going to enter what truthfully is going to be brutal for sellers. It's going to be a buyer's market. because so
Even
many
more of a
businesses-
buyer's
yes.
market. It's already starting to become a buyer's
Yes,
market.
and
because of-
so many boomers will be looking to get out. But boomer business owners, and I know many of them, who are sitting there and saying, well, I'll wait until I find a young fellow who's willing to work 70 hours just like me, are going to be waiting a long time.
It's one of the questions we ask sellers is hey, what do you see as the buyer of your business? So we kind of get an idea about what they think a potential buyer is. And that's the older the individual, the more we hear, I want someone that was like me when I started it, that was gung-ho, was in their 20s or 30s, that wants it. The problem is those people that are at that age, that demographic, don't have the net worth to finance the acquisition.
They don't have the money, and they don't have the interest. They were raised, you say work ethic, but it's a values question. They were raised that work and life are separate. Work isn't life.
Right.
They want to keep their personal life outside of work. They don't want it intruding. Boomers mix it all up.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole work-life balance. The axiom was created about boomers. It was created in the early '80s about boomers who had no work-life balance, and these folks don't have an interest in everything being work. They want to, and in reality, neither did our parents. If you look back at the greatest generation, they knew what was work and what was life. You knocked off at 5 o'clock, you came home, you spent time with the family. On weekends, you barbecued in the backyard with your friends. They didn't go into the office on Saturday and Sunday, and certainly they didn't have the technology hooks to be sitting at home answering emails. The boomers embraced all that. So, you've got the millennials, the generation born from 1980, 82 until 2000. Interesting generation. There's 80 million of them. They're bigger than the boomers. And they were raised in a much tougher market. There's like 24, 25% unemployment among recent college graduates now. So they have not had the road paved with gold for them. And they may turn out to be a lot tougher. But there's going to be a trough there for about 15 years when Gen X is the primary buyer market, and they're not that interested in it. If you want to return to franchises, we were talking about franchising. I admire McDonald's. McDonald's is a very bright company, and they run very well. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars on management development, and they have been buying back franchises for ages because they understand that in order to survive, they can't keep being dependent on finding people that are willing to work 70 hours a week to keep the store going. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to get 40-hour-a-week managers that get paid a salary and go in and do what they're supposed to do and go home at the end of the day. And these franchises that are still built around an owner-operator that they expect to do the work of two people in order to make a profit are not going to fare well when the boomers move on, because they're not going to have anybody to sell those franchises to.
We see, and you've seen this too, John, is that you've got these people who've grown these businesses to that gray area, that size, at $5 to $20 million, where you don't have enough cash flow to satisfy a private equity group, mm-hmm. and it's too large for an individual buyer, and most of your standard lending terms don't meet it, and a lot of these businesses fall in that area.
Right. I have a client right now that owns three retail operations, branded operations for a big international brand. And they have now put out a mandate or an edict that each store, in order to be sold, must have a buyer with at least $1 million in liquid assets post-closing.
After closing.
After closing. It's not going to happen. He can't find three buyers like that for his three stores. He started them on a shoestring, paid some, I don't know what he paid, maybe $50,000 for the rights to start them up. He's built them up very successfully, and now they want somebody as substantial as him to come in and take them over. But, he's substantial because he built them himself from nothing, and that's where his liquid assets come from. And he's not going to find buyers that have similar wherewithal to come in and do that.
You better hope the franchise takes the same approach and starts buying back the franchisee stores.
Yeah, well, the other owners like him are looking at it and, seriously wondering if there's any future in their arrangement. And I'm talking to a lot more boomers that are looking at these situations and saying, I realize nobody can buy my company. I just need to make my money now and then let the chips fall where they may, whether I sell to employees for a note or close it down. Certainly in a lot of businesses that are dependent on the owner, they'll close down. Because if you're a chief cook and bottle washer, or as Doug Tatum from Tatum CFO once said in his book, No Man's Land, a lot of entrepreneurs work their tails off to get to the point where they're making 3 times as much money as they could as an employee. Unfortunately, they're doing the work of 4 employees to make 3 times the money.
Yeah, that's frequently seen. Probably what we probably also want to talk about is the kind of the exit strategy for some of these people, John. I thought that one of the interesting things that we spoken about before is the ability for people to plan for this and to do something like an ESOP. But you said the life of an ESOP is only like 8 years or something.
Yeah, we had talked about that the last time I was on. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, the reason most ESOPs don't last very long is not because they fail. It's because key people in the company that are taking the responsibility for running it don't want to share. And they wind up buying out the other owners and taking the company back to a fully private model.
Okay. You want to talk a little about the tsunami effect going on, the demographics?
Sure, we can talk. I was going to hold that to the next segment.
Okay.
Well, in terms of one of the things you wrote an article back in 2007, and I thought it was actually very apropos that once they grow the business, the baby boomers grow the business to a certain profitability, they get it debt free, then they, as we kind of said, they take the foot off the gas. Mm-hmm. And I think we see that in some of our sellers.
Sure. We see a lot of overvalued companies because the owner, I just ran across one recently. The company's doing $4 or $5 million a year. It has $1.5 million worth of assets. The owner's taking out $100,000 a year because his ranch is paid for, his coast house is paid for, his boat's paid for, and he doesn't need any more. And now he can't understand why nobody wants to buy a $5 million business that only makes $100,000 a year.
Yeah, and then stop growing.
Yeah.
When we return, we're going to discuss why baby boomer businesses are not well suited for the follow-up generation.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
Business brokerage is a very regional business due to the requirement of having face-to-face buyer and seller meetings. While Robert and Doug are regionally centric to South Central Texas with their brokerage company, Business Brokers of San Antonio, and their equipment appraisal company, Equipment Appraisers of San Antonio, they have also established BizBrokerTalk.com to help assist sellers and buyers with finding professionals in a variety of areas required in the business transaction process. This includes certified business brokers, SBA loan packagers, 401k conversion companies, lenders, as well as other necessary advisory sources. Whether you're selling or buying a business, you need a team of professionals on your side to guide you through the process. Visit BizBrokerTalk.com today. And if you're in the South Texas area, please visit Business Brokers of San Antonio at bbofsa.com or Equipment Appraisers of San Antonio at eaofsa.com. Bob Pritchard has over 30 years of experience as a straight-talking business consultant and author working with some of the top Fortune 500 companies. Now he's come to the Voice America Business Channel to help you and your business. Tune in to the Bob Pritchard Radio Show for information about starting and successfully running a profitable business. From the movers and shakers to great marketing screw-ups, you can't afford to miss a single edition of the Bob Pritchard Radio Show. Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern on Voice America Business. We're always talking business. Talk to an expert. Call now, toll free, 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Voice America Business Network. This is Biz Broker Talk with Robert Howells and Doug Scheiding. To reach the show today, please call 1-866-472-5790. That's 1-866-472-5790. Or you may send an email to podcast@bizbrokertalk.com. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Biz Broker Talk with Robert Howells and
Doug Scheiding.
Today we're visiting with John Dini. He's a exit planner, coach, facilitator, and business consultant. He's written several books, and the one we're speaking of today is not only a book, but it's also a presentation called Beating the Baby Boomer Bust, or Beating the Boomer Bust. We have been talking about the competitive boomers as they go into business, and now we're going to discuss why boomers' businesses are not all suited for the fallen generation. Doug, do you have a giveaway for this segment?
Yeah, we meant to do that at the beginning of the show, so apologize about that. But we want to give away a signed copy of one of John's his latest book, Hunting in a Farmer's World. And so the first person that sends an email to our email address at podcast@bizbrokertalk.com and mentions John Denny's book, we'll send them a free copy.
Very good. John.
And we have an offer for all your listeners. I have a website devoted to this topic called theboomerbust.com. And there's we talked about a lot of numbers, and we will be talking about a lot of numbers and statistics and charts that aren't suited for radio. And my ebook, which is about 45 pages or so, Beating the Boomer Bust, is on that website, and the download code to get it for free is Woodstock, cleverly enough, capital WOODSTOCK, and if they go in and put in Woodstock, they can download the PDF of the book for free and have all these stats and everything to peruse at their leisure.
Very good.
Not that many people want to. I'm a bit of a geek about this, but so anyway, you asked me just before the break. We were starting to talk about the tsunami.
Yeah.
Did you see the movie Perfect Storm?
Yes.
The guys are out there on the North Atlantic, and there's a storm coming from above, and a storm coming from the left, and a storm coming from the right, and they all slam together at the same time, and they all die. Sorry, spoiler alert. They all die.
But it was a really big way.
Yeah. But, we're kind of looking at the same tsunami now. This is a coincidence of conditions that's phenomenal. One is just numbers, and we've already talked a bit about the numbers. We have 8,000 boomers a day leaving the workforce. We have 4,000 or leaving the prime age for business ownership, which I'm pegging at 45 to 65. And we have 4,000 Gen Xers a day reaching the bottom end of that range. And so there's just a shortage of bodies. There aren't enough people. So the demographics are part of it. The second part of it is the sociographics.
Explain that.
Well, we business owners are not the only ones in American society that are looking at these numbers and saying, gee, what's going to happen? Corporate America is too. And corporate America is acutely aware of the fact that they have 2 boomers leaving for every 1 Gen Xer coming up in the ranks. And that's why you're seeing things like, greater leeway in family medical leave, telecommuting, job sharing, flexible hours, portable benefits. I mean, these are being designed to satisfy the Gen Xers and the greater increase in female workers who are coming in. You see giant corporations, AT&T in this area and others, who are offering early out incentives. You see them come up to a 58 or 60-year-old boomer and say, we'll give you 4 years of acceleration on your pension plan, and we'll give you 4 years of salary if you leave now. And you say, my goodness, why would any corporation want their experienced people out that badly? And the answer is because they need the slots.
Right.
They need to start training the replacements for the boomers, and the boomers aren't moving. They like working. They're healthier. I mean, think about industries. This is an aside. Think about industries that the boomers have created, and possibly the biggest one is health. There's a saying about the boomer generation. We all want to live a really, really long time and then die young. And we're doing our best to make that happen.
Yeah, that's true.
Health clubs, home workout equipment, spandex, Viagra.
Med spas. I can't tell you how many med spas.
Med spas, cosmetic surgery, cosmetic dentistry, home videos from Jane Fonda's to Zumba. All these things that we're doing to try and retain this eternal youth. And the boomers have, it's become a multi-$100 billion industry, just vitamin supplements, just catering to boomers' desire to stay young and active. And we're staying young and active. And that means we're working longer. And we're not getting out of the way. So corporate America is trying to push us out of the way. And they have benefits to attract the following generation and to comply with the following generation's lifestyle that small business owners can't match. If you've got 10 employees, you can't start talking about flexible hours and job sharing.
Right.
And then finally, the third storm coming together is the psychographic. It's the value system of the following generations. The separation of work and life, the desire to have something happen outside of work that you're not identifying. It's the lack of identification with work. I gave this presentation to a group last year, and it was a group of business owners, 100% business owners. There were, I don't know, maybe 80 in the room. And I always survey the audience to see how many are boomers. And to my surprise, about half of this room was Generation X.
Wow.
And which was very unusual for my audiences. About half boomers, about half Gen X. And so I stopped at the middle. I said, let me ask you a question. I said, boomers, stay out of this for the moment. I just want to ask the Gen Xers in the room. I said, do you consider yourselves ambitious entrepreneurs? And they all nodded their heads and said yes. And I said, how many of you would like to hear about an opportunity where you can make a lot of money? And they all raised their hands, every one of them. And I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. All you have to do is promise me to work 55 hours a week for the next 20 years. And they all started laughing hysterically. And I said, what's the matter? And they said, we're not going to work 55 hours a week for the next 20 years. I said, I thought you wanted to hear about a great opportunity where you can make a lot of money. They said, not if it's going to take 55 hours a week for the next 20 years. Then I turned to the boomers in the room. I said, how many of you have worked 55 hours a week for the last 20 years? And almost every hand went up. There's a disconnect here. Mm. Boomers are working in businesses that the following generation doesn't want to run.
Yeah.
And no amount of discounting or profitability is going to change their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole change in mindset.
Right.
To do that. So, yeah.
So we have a bunch of aging boomers and about to have a lot more aging boomers who are trying to get rid of businesses to too few people with a different set of values and in the face of much greater competition from large corporations that can load up on the benefits. So it's not going to be pleasant for the boomers that wait too long. The good news is boomers are competitive. And if people are listening to your show, they're like the people that have timers on their lights in their houses. I once saw an interview with a burglar, and they said, do timers really work? And he said, yes, they do. And they said, why, you can't tell that the lights are all going on at 8 o'clock and going off at 11? And he said, well, of course I can. That's not that difficult to figure out. But the guy next door doesn't even have timers. So, and it's the same thing for the boomers. If you're a boomer business owner and you're aware that in order to sell your business and get a decent price for it, it's going to have to be a business that earns somebody a living without chaining them to it for 60 hours a week. And you build your business that way, even if it requires reducing your profitability a little bit, even if it requires you don't do the work of 3 people, you're certainly well advised to do it because at least you have a saleable business. If it's a business that still requires an owner to show up for 14 hours a day, I don't see how you're going to get rid of it. The odds are going to be terribly against you.
That's a valid point.
And how is this received, like in some of your coaching, seminars and sessions where you're talking to some of these baby boomer owners?
I've come up with a new ending after the first 8 or 10 times I did the presentation because there was a deafening silence at the end of every presentation. People are depressed because, I feel like Paul Revere. I'm sounding the alarm that this is coming. This is inevitable. If you go to theboomerbus.com, you will see a whole series of quotes from Pete Peterson, from David Beers, from the Wall Street Journal, from The Economist, talking about how this wave is inevitable.
Well, it's like we talked about in the break. I truly believe that that's one of the reasons the government's been throwing a blind eye to illegal immigration is because if it wasn't going on, our country would be contracting like many of the European countries.
Yes, and legal or illegal, we have to be thankful for immigration because our replacement birth rate is about 2.1 per family, per couple. And
that's the break-even line, right?
Yeah, that's the break-even line. You need a little bit extra because things do happen. But, when I talk about the countries that are down, whose economies are collapsing. You talk about a Greece or a Portugal, they've been running at 1.6, 1.7 for the last 30 years, and you can't sustain an economy that way. And if you look at the birth rates, they're not, how many kids do you have, Robert?
Exactly.
Well,
we're
a total of 0.
Yeah, you guys are a total of 0. We have 2. Most of my friends have 1 or 2. Nowadays, 3 kids is enough to get an exclamation, and 4 kids, they just assume the guy's a sex maniac, because that's just overboard. But how many kids did we come from in our families? Another thing I do with the audiences is I ask, how many of you have more children than siblings? No hands go up.
I bet not.
No hands go up. Because we're having smaller families, and the larger families are from the immigrant population. And they're also, you see the immigrants, taking over the family businesses. I was talking with a Jewish friend the other day, and his family came out of like a little greengrocer business in New York City, and that all used to be Eastern European Jews. Because those businesses, if you're familiar with them, the ones that have the trays out on the street of the vegetables and stuff, basically dad's going down to the wholesale market at 3 o'clock in the morning to buy the day's inventory, and the kids mop the store before and after school, and mom runs the register all day, and grandma helps close up at night. And, there are no Eastern European Jews running those stores in New York City anymore because their kids all grew up to be doctors and lawyers. And they succeeded. It was the American dream. They got educated. So who owns all the greengrocers now in New York City?
New immigrant.
Koreans. Yeah. Because the Koreans, dad goes down at 3 o'clock in the morning to buy vegetables. And it's a family-run business. And certainly with that work ethic, the Koreans will send their kids off to be doctors and lawyers. And I don't know who's next, but there's another nationality coming in.
We'll get the steady state at some point. We've only got a couple minutes left. Any other points you'd like to make, John?
Well, I say in my new book, Hunting in a Farmer's World, that every entrepreneur, male or female, should have a tattoo permanently emblazoned on their chest in mirror image so they can see it after the shower when they're getting dressed in the morning. And it should say, the more I work in my business, the less it is worth.
Yeah, the more you work, the less it's worth. That's very true.
And they really, if you want to sell a business in the next 10 years, you need to take that to heart, because there's a lot of people that don't have timers on their lights, and they're going to be in trouble. And if you're awake and you're paying attention, you should be able to sell your company and make some good retirement money out of it. But it needs to be positioned for your buyer.
And plan 1 to 3 years in advance, correct?
Absolutely.
Well, we've been speaking with John Dini. He's an exit planner, a business coach, a facilitator, and a consultant. He's written several books, 11 Things You Absolutely Need to Know About Selling Your Business, Beating the Boomer Bust, and Hunting in a Farmer's World, about the differences that drives entrepreneurs. Next week, we'll be talking about estate planning, specifically the Deferred Sales Trust, with Bob Brickley.
The information and ideas provided within this show are intended for educational purposes only and not intended as investment advice. The hosts of this show do not provide tax or legal advice. You should consult with your tax or legal professional regarding your individual situation. No information should be interpreted as securities advice. With regard to your particular investments and financial strategies, consult your financial planner, CPA, and investment professionals. While we have endeavored to ensure the accuracy of the information in this program, we do not guarantee or give any warranty as to the accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of any information.